Hello everyone and welcome back to Little Quilter. Today we are trying to decide if I've got a snag in the Kite in a Square quilt. So as you guys know, if you've been following along, my goal was to do the top of the quilt like this and then the bottom of the quilt basically with like a line of these kites going down and then a line going across as well. And to keep everything lined up, and it had been going pretty well. It was just like a smidge off, but I don't know if that progression of it being a little bit off is just slowly inching every time I roll the quilt up. And I've tried to keep on top of it, but let me jump to earlier where the big mess up happened. This is not good. Not good at all. So I had finished a row, moved it up. I forgot to lock everything back down. I don't know if that is really the cause of it, but I didn't check my alignment. I just thought everything's been going so well, I'm just gonna move up. And then, I don't know, something needed to be fixed on the machine, and so I happened to just take a peek, and this is what I'm seeing. Hold on. Okay, so here's the underside of the quilt, and you can see we're doing pretty good on this last row here, right? That's all lining up really nicely, and going along here a smidge off there, so you can see, let me see. So you can see this line right here, a little bit off, but it's not terrible. And then it's getting a little bit worse. I can see that line right there. So definitely need to sort of readjust things a little bit, maybe straighten some stuff up a little bit. But then, as we move back this way, oh man, it gets real bad right here. So this is the alignment for the horizontal row, and yeah, that's not good at all. I guess I'm gonna pull all of this out, all of this here, because look, this is the point. The point's supposed to be here, and this is not lining up. So I don't know if this is fixable. I guess this is the downside of doing a quilt like this. I mean, it's not terrible down that way. It seems a little bit better. I don't know. Oh, gosh. So frustrating. That's pretty terrible right there, though. That's not ideal at all. Okay, let me see what, I guess I'm just gonna start picking stuff out. Okay, so after a lot of unpicking, and I just want to say that I know a lot of people get worried about the quilts coming undone because we press the seams open, and if you're just doing stitch in the ditch, that might be a concern, I guess. But if you're doing free motion quilting like I'm doing on these quilts, that is not a worry, because picking those stitches out was awful. It took forever. Okay, now I'm going to show you what I've done in hopes. I have one problem area that I just don't know how it's going to go, but we'll see what happens. All right, so here's the quilt, and what I've done is gone through and pinned in some of these areas where basically on the back of the quilt they should come together. And so I've got pins in almost every single block here, and I've tried to sort of straighten it out and flatten it. The biggest problem that you can see is obviously down here where it's pretty wrinkled. And so I don't know too if the quilt is tilted a little bit. I thought it was pretty flat going across here. And even whenever I look at, let's look here. So you can see where it's just a smidge off. So there's the center, and this is where that one is. But for the most part, that's not a big deal when we go across this, and especially as we get into the side areas here, that doesn't look too bad, and everything looks fairly straight. But the only thing that I can think that has happened is as I have rolled this up, there's been enough micro movement that we've basically kind of pulled one a little bit too far and the other one hasn't come as much. And I think some of it could be associated with that whenever I went to do this line, I didn't lock those. But I also think whenever I look down here and see this much wrinkle, you know, something must have just happened with my alignment. So I'm going to try and quilt this. I'm going to try and get it as flat as I can. I'm really nervous about this. And I think the other part is that when I just had this line going down, it wasn't as bad, but now I have hit basically along this line the point for the horizontal one, and that's where I'm coming into trouble, is because, you know, it's really easy to keep this quilt straight. It's a little bit harder to keep it moving, so kind of like thinking about it as if this were... So it's almost like thinking about this as if I needed a walking foot to move this, and so things haven't been moving exactly along, which is part of why I don't routinely float my quilts, but obviously there's still some micro movement with this. And of course, if you just have a plain background, that's not really a problem, because as long as you have enough fabric to roll it up and stay in, you know, to end the quilt, then you're going to be fine. And that's generally why people ask for that 5-inch sort of leeway all the way around the quilt. In this instance, it's a little bit more disconcerting because the whole design idea was that everything flowed nicely. So I'm going to see what happens here and see if I can get this done right. All right, everybody, so we're back, and as you can see, earlier this morning I did a little bit more sewing on this and made some progress, which is good. I ended up giving up last night because it went from bad to worse, and that I honestly thought I had broken my machine. I even called, even though it was after hours, and I left them a voicemail. We'll see if they will return my call, but I actually called the manufacturer or the place that I bought it from, because my machine was not working right, and it would sew and then it would start beeping. It did 3 beeps in a row. It would be like sewing and then it would go beep, 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 and it would stop when it was beeping. The screen back here would gray out, like you couldn't touch any of the buttons at all. And however, once it stopped beeping, even though the screen was totally grayed out, you could hit the go button and start sewing again. But when it messed up, it would skip a stitch. And I wasn't sure if it was actually also skipping stitches during it. So I found a stopping place, was completely freaked out, turned the machine off, turned it back on, first step. That did not fix the problem. Second step, I looked to make sure that everything was set up properly. So my needle was threaded properly, nothing was caught. The needle itself was sitting full in, hadn't like slipped down during any of the sewing. And I also went through, so let me show you. So on the King Quilter Elite, you have this button right here that you can click. If I can hit it, there we go. And so this tells you sort of where I'm at. So I've spent 5 hours, 42 minutes on this quilt. I've done this many stitches. And if you go over here, there's like this lifeline button. And if you click it, And then when you go through here, this is basically your entire machine here. Okay, so it's going to tell you if the machine is not reading properly. So for the Y and X axis, it moving up and down and side to side. This is checking your needle, that it's reading it properly. And that's your motor. That's the speed. I can't remember what that one is. But it basically checks everything. And so I went through and I checked everything on there. It was all working properly. And then I was even more confused because I was like, okay, the machine says that it's working properly, but every time I go to sew, it's messing up. So then I switched from the, let's see, from the eye, which is basically like, it's controlled stitching, so whether I speed up or slow down, regulate it. It's a regulated stitch mode. That's what it's called. And so then I decided to switch from regulated stitch mode to precision mode, which basically it is still regulated, but instead of when you stop on the other one, basically the needle keeps going and you can choose at what rate that is going. So on mine, it goes fairly slow. With precision, once you stop, the needle stops as well. Now, it could stop in the up position or the down position with that, but it's not going to move unless you move the machine, right? So I switched to that, and it did seem to work really well for a while, and then it started doing the same thing with the beeping, and I was just really stressed out. That was the point at which I had called the company and I left them a voicemail, and I basically just gave up. I was tired of picking stitches out and I was worried that I was going to make the machine worse, so I just turned it off and went downstairs and went to bed. And all night last night, every time I woke up, every time my kid made a sound, every time anybody moved, I woke up thinking about the machine. And finally, this morning when I woke up, I decided, you know what I need to do? I need to change my needle. And I don't know why that this would do anything, but I'm going to change my needle. And so I took the old needle that was in there that I had done most of the sewing with out. The other thing I did was, this was the bobbin that I was using, and it's a Magna-Glide bobbin. I put another Magna-Glide bobbin in there, but just in case there was some sort of weird thing about this bobbin, I pulled it out, so I put a brand new bobbin, not the bobbin holder. So I put a brand new bobbin into the bobbin holder, same one, cleaned the machine, and then I oiled it, put a new needle in it, and it's worked beautifully. It's been great. So if you're having that issue, I can't tell you exactly what it was. Maybe I'll be brave enough and put this one back in. I don't know. But it's worked great. I do really wonder if it wasn't the needle itself, because like we've talked about before with this quilt is super thick and has a lot of very thick seams. And so I wonder if it hadn't blunted or bent the needle a little bit and it was catching on something. That's my guess. And I have no way to prove that because the needle itself didn't look that much different than the new one. But I changed them anyways, and that has been working perfectly. So that's my tip. If your machine starts doing that, maybe just check your needle or just change the whole thing, even if it looks totally fine. Okay, now I'm going to show you how this is working out so far. So here is some of what I have quilted on this row, and you can see that it seems to be laying down fairly flat. I'm okay with it. I do think that the big question is going to be what the underside looks like. And you can see over here where I had picked all of that out. I haven't re-sewn this yet. I kind of thought this was the big problem area that I was actually going to work here. Kind of like when you sit down at a sit-down sewing machine and you work from the inside out to let all of the wrinkles just come this way or down this way. Okay, so we are under the quilt here, and I'm going to start at the good area and work backwards towards the bad area, because this is somewhat of a fail. So you can see there, I'm sorry that the arms of the quilt are in the way of the machine, but that point is pretty good and everything seems to be lining up pretty well there. This is a little bit off here. And then as we move back, it just gets a little bit worse. That one's not too bad. With regards to the actual like kite part, it really lines up nicely. And even this is not bad. It's really just these points right here that are not really ideal. And yeah, it is definitely disappointing. Also, to have gone through all of that to really just end up here is fairly sad, because I don't know. I mean, maybe, let's see if I can get a little bit closer. So I do think it's a little bit better. Here's the original stitching line. So it was all the way to here. So we've definitely moved it back some. But I would say, in all honesty, that that's probably the most that you're really going to be able to move a quilt like this, which is fairly sad, to be honest. So I think overall what I have learned from this go around on the Kite in a Square quilt is just that it's really important, if you are going to do a quilt like this, that you really ensure everything lines up, because I think that there's a couple reasons that this could look like this. So one is that my quilt was not totally straight across the top bar, and so when I wound it up, it was a little bit off, and that's causing that change. Two would be that because my piecing from the top and the bottom is a little bit off, and so if that's the case, then there's that possibility that even if I laid these down on the floor, it wouldn't be exactly right on top of each other. I really thought that it was, but I was also working with a really large quilt and really not the biggest space. I mean, I have this much space. So I don't really have a large space to just lay this out and ensure everything is lined up. So it could be that actually my stitching is not where it needed to be. And then the third thing would just be the small variability in rolling this up. I don't know if floating would be helpful for those of you that do float your quilts. That would be a question that I would have for you. Have you done a design like this where it mattered where the placement was on the back? And did you find it simpler because you were floating it? Did it line up easier? Were you able to adjust things? Because I do think as you start quilting it, no matter what, you've kind of set it down. I mean, it's like putting concrete down, right? This is not moving. So I can only pull this, stretch this fabric so much before it's just not going to go anymore. And the same for the back. If the back is attached a half an inch, you're not pulling it down a half an inch, right? So you might get it a quarter of an inch. So the big lesson from this is just how difficult this challenge actually was. But my other hope is that if I can keep it consistent, again, we're still going to have that same look that I was going for, hopefully. So ultimately, the results will be whenever I finish this thing and pull it off. But I have been very excited with how it's working today. Yesterday was pretty stressful for this. So I'm going to do a little bit more quilting on this thing. We are getting close to another fun different block that I'm going to do. So I'm looking forward to showing you guys that one. And as always, I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video. If you've had some issues with your machine, I hope this helps as well. And I look forward to seeing you guys again. Y'all have a great day. Thanks.